But we got a huge game tonight. So let's dive right into that. It is our big story. Michigan State and Illinois in Champaign. Spartans have won the last 3 in this series. Up won 4 in a row against the Illini in a dozen years. Illinois trying to end a skid against ranked teams. They're the only team in the conference, though, with multiple players among the top 10 scorers in the league. Alfonso Plummer and Kofi Coburn, although you see at the bottom, Coburn's status for tonight is unknown. We'll call it questionable due to a concussion. That is the biggest story, literally and figuratively, in this one. I know you've been in touch with the Illinois staff today. What can you tell us?
Well, Brad Underwood did tell me that he did practice yesterday, but there are concussion protocols. Obviously, Illinois is very familiar with this because they had to deal with this with Andre Curbelo. We have sat on this desk and said that everyone deals with a concussion differently. So he's a game-time decision. That's what Brad said. And clearly, they are a different team. No shock here. No breaking news. They're a different team without Kofi Coburn, just like Wisconsin is a different team without Johnny Davis, and really maybe to some extent without Tyler Wall.
They were a different team without Tyler Wall on Friday as well. Did you see, by any chance, Izzo's news conference, I think it was yesterday, where he was asked what the difference is with Illinois, with and without Coburn?
I did not see it.
He had a hilarious response. He kind of did a double take. You see the numbers here, and again, staggering difference. He did a double take, and his response was, "Have you seen him?" Right? I mean, the guy's enormous.
Right.
He is such a huge focal point. But I mean, you look at that game against Maryland, Andy. They got eaten alive inside. So I mean, it does really. Like, you want to talk about what went on this summer with Kofi Coburn going into the portal and the thought that he might leave Illinois and how different a team this would be without him. I mean, it is remarkable the difference he makes. They did not play well against Maryland, and I think it was about more than just Kofi. But, man, without him, they are a totally different team.
Well, remember, he didn't play the first 3 games of the season.
Yes.
Because of a NCAA violation on an NIL deal when he was thought to be a pro. So look, it is night and day with him. It is not necessarily with Curbelo. As well as Curbelo played last Monday against Purdue, clearly Illinois was able to be successful without him, with Trent Frazier playing so well and Alfonso Plummer. But it's just, you cannot duplicate what Kofi Coburn means to Illinois, especially now against Michigan State. Because we saw in the game against Wisconsin, Marble played well, and he gives them some physicality. So if Marble's playing well for Michigan State, Bingham is, sort of a high flyer. He's not as physical, but he can be tough to keep off the backboard. Michigan State's going to clearly have an advantage inside if Kofi can't go.
Yeah, these are very different teams in a lot of ways, but one similarity is rebounding is a huge part of both of their identities. And again, we saw the degree to which Illinois got taken apart inside by Maryland. And part of that was just a lack of defense, wasn't necessarily a rebounding issue, but not having a rim protector, 40-16 in the paint. But Michigan State, I mean, coming off what I thought almost inarguably was its worst performance of the year against Northwestern, then they turn around. That may have been their best performance.
Yes.
Against Wisconsin. And again, I agree with you. I do think part of it was the absence of Tyler Wall. I think that was a huge inhibiting factor for the Badgers.
But they popped them right off the bat.
No doubt. But, I mean, Michigan State was clearly the better team on that night. And it feels like, we were joking about this, Trent Meacham and I were yesterday, like, you give Tom Izzo 5 days with his team when he's a little frustrated with where they've been and he wants to send a clear message to them, they're going to get better because that's just who he is.
Yeah, the one thing I would just say about Illinois that we can't get in everyone's heads, obviously, but I do wonder if there was not the combination of a letdown from the way that Purdue game ended. I mean, overtime, you have a great chance to obviously win it. It's great atmosphere. You lose it. Then you find out Coburn can't go. And then you go to Maryland, where there is not the same atmosphere, especially now because of what's going on at Maryland. I think it could be a little human. I'm not giving an excuse, but it did sort of add up to being, the trap game and what you want to say in between Purdue and Michigan State. And that Maryland game fell right in there, and Maryland took advantage. But you're right. I mean, Michigan State, when they're good, when they're on, they can be the best team in this league, no question.
And we have talked a lot about Illinois' resume, and we have Mike DeCourcy's bracket up last week. He had them as a 5 seed, right? And we were saying,
and I challenged it.
You did, but I mean, like if you really look at kind of who they've beaten, they don't have a lot of real signature wins here. And you think about last year's team that got a 1 seed, they beat 6 top 10 ranked teams last year. 6! Like that is a staggering number for what teams go decades without beating 6 top 10 ranked teams.
Well, and I think a great example to juxtapose would be Wisconsin and Illinois. Because if you go straight by the numbers, the data, Wisconsin will be a higher seed. No question.
Higher. Yep.
Significantly. Could be on the 2 line. But if you watch both teams, you would say to yourself, whoa, when both teams are on, you'd say, oh, Illinois, much better team, more entertaining, more intimidating, yet the numbers don't back that up. So that's what's going to be interesting is because I do think when we get to March, Illinois will be seeded more to their data, to their record, yet when they're on, if they're a 5 or a 6, those higher seeds are not going to want to see them further down, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I mean, they have a player who is so different than most teams have, right? I mean, there are great guards in college basketball, and there are guys who stand apart. I'm not suggesting that there aren't. That look, there are All-American guards and there are third-team All-Conference guards, and there's a difference between them. But Kofi Cockburn is just such a unique physical presence. That kind of goes back to the Izzo comment that I was joking about earlier, where have you seen this guy? I mean, he just is a different kind of player. And if you don't have an interior game that can come close to matching up, he can dramatically alter a game. Yes, so to your point, if they're a 5 seed and you're seeing them in the second round and saying, wait a minute, this is what we're getting.
I'll tell you another team.
Brutal.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, right now I would have Purdue on the 2 line, and a lot of it is the Villanova win and the road Illinois. But outside of that, and maybe I'm being nitpicky here, lost to Wisconsin, lost to Rutgers, Purdue, if they suffer a few more, lost to Indiana, if they suffer a few more, they could also be a team that gets seeded more to their record than their talent.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting to look at the top of the league, and this is something we talked about yesterday, too. We spend a lot of time kind of debating who's the best team, and I think you could certainly make an argument. Michigan State's in first place. For all the talk about Illinois and all the talk about Purdue, and I don't think Michigan State's had as difficult a schedule as those two have, but the facts are the facts, and they are a first-place team, and again, they can reinforce that notion coming up here tonight. But I think what we have are probably 5 really, really good teams in the Big Ten. I'm not convinced we have a great team, and that could hurt the Big Ten as you get into some of this seeding, because there is this feeling that they're going to cannibalize one another to a certain extent.
And the one we don't mention, I feel like we always forget them, is Ohio State.
Yeah. No, Ohio State's in that group of 5, no doubt.
And they certainly have that potential. And the other one, jury's still out, and we're going to talk about them, but Michigan. I mean, Michigan still has not even come close to its potential. And if they ever do, they're going to be a tough out.
Yeah, we'll see. We're going to get to them coming up a little bit later. So one of the biggest things you're watching tonight, so Kofi and whether or not he plays for Illinois is clearly the biggest storyline. I find Andre Curbelo really interesting, too. I mean, he had the incredible game when he came back against Purdue, and then against Maryland did not play well, and then it came out afterward that he had been sick. And so, he had a temperature well over 100 degrees. And so, hey, the fact that he even went out there and played speaks volumes. But he only made 1 field goal. He was turning the ball over quite a bit. We have seen Andre Curbelo be great at times. And certainly the Purdue game, he was great. We have also seen times where he's the best player on the floor for the other team. I would use the Marquette game as an example this year. So there was a little bit more of that in the game against Maryland. It's a little bit more understandable, though. But to me, he's a really interesting person to watch. And then you mentioned Michigan State and how well they played against Wisconsin. And they did it, Andy, with depth and with some players who maybe hadn't necessarily played all that well of late, stepping up. So to me, kind of how they follow up that performance is huge, too. How about for you? What are the biggest things you're watching?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be really intrigued for for lack of a better term, the rotation guys. And it's weird, at Michigan State, different players have taken on that role. At times, is it Malik Hall, who, isn't necessarily a superstar. Obviously earlier in the season, it was Gabe Brown that we talked a lot about. We're not talking about him as much now. The two-handed, playmaker combination of Hogard and Walker. And then on the other side, is it Plummer? Is it Grandison? Is it, does Trent Frazier have one of these games again where he goes off for 20 plus? DeMonte Williams, does he hit a big shot? We talk a lot about the Curbelo Kofi or Max Christie, on the other side, but I'm going to be intrigued on these sort of guys that are the third, fourth, fifth options if they stand out tonight.
I mean, when you look at what Michigan State did against Wisconsin, part of it was exactly that, right? I mean, you get 43 points off your bench. Mm-hmm. That's a staggering number. To score 86 points against Wisconsin is a staggering number. Most they had given up at home since 2002. So it does kind of speak to, and you were saying this 2-3 weeks ago, why aren't we talking more about Michigan State? Why aren't we talking more about Michigan State? We started to see how good they can be. And I think particularly when your most dynamic player is a freshman, and Max Christie, like if we go 10 years forward, do you have any doubt that the best pro on this Michigan State team is Max Christie?
No, but normally at Michigan State, that's not the case. I mean, they've had a few examples, Zach Randolph, Jackson, where they've had the one-offs. But for the most part, they've got the veteran guys. I thought the most telling part of that game the other night was, if I'm not mistaken, Wisconsin got it to 6. Momentum, crowd, the whole bit. And then Michigan State put a stop to it and came right back. That was the sign of an Izzo team that's matured, that is getting better, that can deal with runs on the road and still get a W.
Lots of intrigue around this game tonight. I'm really interested in Marcus Bingham as well. I mean, he played very sparingly against Northwestern, particularly in the second half. It was clear that Izzo was frustrated with him. Didn't play huge minutes in that Wisconsin game either. Yeah, Marble came in and played really well, double figures off the bench. But again, to me, to be at their absolute best, and maybe I'm talking out both sides of my mouth because I said they played their best game of the year against Wisconsin. But like Marcus Bingham, if he is really, really good and dialed in, he's at a different level. I mean, such a great shot blocker inside.
And we never mentioned Joey Hauser.
Yeah. All right, you just did.
Well, I'm just saying, like, he's another one of these guys.
I mentioned a Michigan team finally seems to be hitting its stride. Consecutive blowout wins over Maryland and Indiana. The Indiana game coming on the road. Shot the ball great over that stretch, better than 50% from 3. Hunter Dickinson has been the focal point. 46 points, 10 assists in those 2 wins. And truthfully, I would say, Andy, and I know you agree with this because we talked about it, that is the first win that they have had this year that will truly resonate with the selection committee. You can maybe make the argument San Diego State, but that's a home game. I mean, I think you would expect to win that game. To go on the road and become the first team to win in Bloomington this year is a really good win. It is clear that this is a team that has games in front of them. I mean, they can make the tournament, right? There's no doubt about that. They still have 6 games against ranked teams. But what would have to happen in your mind for them to do it?
First off, this may sound a little old school and archaic and dated, but I do think it matters that the game was Sunday afternoon on CBS because the selection committee, it was right there for everyone to see, for Michigan to knock off Indiana, high-profile window for everyone to see. Oh, that's a pretty good team. They don't get lost, and I'm not, obviously love everything we do here, but I mean, that was a big-time environment for them to have, and with the whole country, potentially watching leading into the NFL. So that's number one. Number two, they have plenty of opportunities. I talked to Hunter Dickinson yesterday for our BTN digital team, and he thinks that basically the game that he did not play, he told me, against Illinois, when they came back from their pause, they gave them a heck of a game.
They did.
Up until 5 minutes, and he didn't play, and Brandon Johns didn't play in that game. That was sort of a turning point. When they came back from that pause, reset, time to sort of refocus defensively, because that's what's going to get them going here. They locked down Maryland. They really locked down Indiana when Indiana was riding high, and they really feel rejuvenated. We saw in the postgame, and I know it's just a little locker room video, but you could see the connectiveness, in that locker room after that win at Indiana. And they needed that. They needed to feel that to get a win like that on the road. The thing is just out there, I'll just say this, the Big Ten I know is working on it, but this is going to be really tricky. They got to get those 2 games in. They have to reschedule Michigan State and Purdue at Chrysler. And on one side, you say, oh, well, they're home games. Of course Michigan find it. But you got to work with those two schools' schedules that they now have to come to Michigan, which means more than likely those two schools might be playing 3 games in a week. So you're putting those two at a disadvantage, and especially Purdue, which right now, is in the back of the group of trying to win the Big Ten because they've got a couple losses. So that dynamic of how that all works out is going to be really intriguing because Michigan needs those 2 games.
Right, and they need more quality wins, to your point, which is why they need those games. Then you can't lose games like tomorrow. They can't lose to Northwestern. They can't lose to Nebraska. I would say they have Rutgers at home next month. You can't lose that game, particularly since you already lost, on the road to them. So, yeah, I do think that those games get really, really interesting. We both feel like Iowa's a clear-cut tourney team, I think, in terms of talent. But a similar story here. I mean, they don't really have any wins to hang their hat on. What do you see when you look at the Hawkeyes?
Well, I mean, they do have road wins. I mean, whether or not Minnesota and Virginia, which right now, I don't know if they, you would say right now they're not tournament teams, they're still road wins. And that is significant. And, obviously the home win over Indiana, the Utah State win was a neutral. Utah State's not going to be a tournament team. But so you got 3 wins away from Iowa. There is more work to do. Obviously, the Rutgers game was winnable for them. Rutgers did an unbelievable job defensively on them so that they couldn't get that one. But I do think Mike is right. I mean, they're probably going to fall in that 9 to 11 range, somewhere in there, 8, maybe 8, but when they're on, they're also going to be a very difficult team to deal with in the NCAA tournament, especially if they're in an 8-9 game.
Yeah, and you have one of the best players in the country in Keegan Murray. So, and again,
also in the tournament, they can get things going up and down. Yeah,
no doubt. No, play a great style that is difficult to prepare for, that is unusual because of the way they'll press you and because of the way they want to run. They need to get, a 0 in quad 1 isn't great. They've got Purdue at home this week, so you start to build the resume a little bit there.
And they played well against Purdue earlier in the season.
Made a great run.
Without Keegan Murray.
Yes, good point. Okay, so where are you with Rutgers? To me, that loss to Minnesota this week, and I gave all the credit in the world to Minnesota. I think it was one of the more remarkable games and performances we have seen this year. But there are 2 sides to every coin. And the flip side of that coin is if you're Rutgers, you got to win that game.
So, as we've said before, Rutgers has dug themselves a deep hole with what happened in the non-conference. Yes, you can excuse it away with Geo Baker's illness, injury, and all that. The Lafayette loss is just like this albatross on their shoulder that's going to be hard to knock off. Obviously, having Purdue and Michigan wins helps. A road win at Maryland helps. But they have much more work to do. The UMass loss obviously sticks out as well when you look at the net. To me, they're going to be a team that's going to come down to the final weekend, the final week in Champ Week. If they were to get wins in the Big Ten tournament, I think they definitely can be a tournament team.
100%.
No question.
Yes.
But they got to earn it, and they're going to have to do a little bit more than some other teams.
You look at that 108 net, and you don't get in or not get in because you're 108 in the net, but being 108 in the net points out the flaws in your resume, right? And just think about this, Andy. Northwestern's ahead of them in the net significantly. Maryland's ahead of them in the net. Penn State's ahead of them in the net. No one's arguing those are tournament teams right now. So, it just tells you kind of, if you look at the metrics, how much those losses that you talked about, Lafayette and to a lesser extent UMass, hang over them.
We're going to sit here in early March and say Loyola Chicago needs to win the Valley. Murray State needs to win the Ohio Valley.
Yep.
Those kinds of things will affect Rutgers.
Bid Steelers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you don't want, because those teams are good enough to get in no matter what, is what you're saying. And so you don't want a second bid coming out of there.
I guarantee you that Rutgers will be on that list of teams that either will get in because of what happens in other leagues or will not.
What about Minnesota? I think with a 4-game losing streak, and it just felt like, man, they have such a depleted bench, and Eric Curry's hurt, and there are just all these reasons to not believe in Minnesota. And yet, then they go out, and again, I just can't say enough about that game. If you are a team, and I've said this a bunch this week, but I just think it bears repeating. If you are the team that gets the least production off your bench of any team in America, and you are out 3 starters, to win a conference game against what we just said is a pretty good team, I think that's unbelievable.
Look, Ben Johnson should get consideration. He won't win it, for Coach of the Year, but he should get consideration. He should be on a list. We've said that from the beginning of what he did in the non-conference. Minnesota is going to be an interesting case because if they win enough games, let's hypothetically, you don't always compare conference teams versus conference teams, but the Michigan win on the road at Mississippi State, beating a comparable team in Rutgers, if they were to get that Big Ten record to 500 somehow, I don't know if they can, but if they did get to 10-10, I think they'd get in. If they're 8-10 or 9-11, if my math is right here, they're going to need work. But they could be a team that in the Big Ten tournament in Indy, that sneaks up on people and says, whoa, suddenly they're in the quarters or in the semis, and now we got to think about them.
Michigan getting better helps them a lot.
Yes.
Right? I mean, all of a sudden that win looks better.
And so does Mississippi State.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, and all these things are interconnected. Mississippi State tonight plays Kentucky. What if Mississippi State wins that game? Then that helps Minnesota. Yeah. Like, all these things are connected.
I also think in a weird sort of way, I mean, if you're Ben Johnson, you need everyone healthy and back in that lineup. But to build confidence with guys who don't play that much and to show them, hey, you can be a big part. I mean, Trayton Thompson was a non-factor on this team. He was incredible on Saturday for a guy who had barely played at all. He scored more points on Saturday than he scored all year coming in. I mean, it was amazing, right? And so now all of a sudden, if he's a guy, you've built a little bit of depth. Maybe you don't have to have the thinnest bench in America. So,
and think back to the road game at Michigan State. They almost stole that one.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. No, they were in just about every game, and then they went through that stretch where it felt like, maybe it's slipping a bit. But no, huge. Again, can't say enough. He's done a phenomenal job. Whether or not they can get in, I think if they get in, to your point, if they get in the tournament, I don't know. I mean, I guess you have to see what happens with everyone else, but I think he's Big Ten Coach of the Year. If they're in the NCAA tournament.
But they're the kind of team that they could go win the NIT.
Yeah. All right, good. Women's hoops tonight. Caitlin Clark looks to continue her incredible play when she leads the Hawkeyes against the Lady Lions. Big Ten women's basketball presented by Disney Parks tonight at 6 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. And speaking of Clark, 4 straight Big Ten Women's Player of the Week honors. Megan McEwen is here to talk through some women's hoop stuff. And let's start there. I mean, she leads the nation in scoring. She is second in the nation in assists. Is this the best player in the country?
Right now, Caitlin Clark is the best player in the country, hands down. I mean, she's had 4 triple-doubles this season alone. Back-to-back games, mind you, and she's doing it in 30-point performances. It's not as if she's getting 10, 10, and 10. She's getting 35 and 32, and she's doing it against Big Ten teams, one of the top conferences in the country. She's playing out of her mind right now. I think she's been most effective from that facilitating standpoint, however. She gets other people involved, and she's unselfish with her passes, especially in transition, and that's when Iowa is most dangerous. Get this, there's only one player in men's or women's basketball in the history to average points per game and assists per game in the country be number 1. It's Trae Young. Caitlin Clark currently first in points per game, second in assists per game, so she could technically become the second player to ever do that.
Whatever became of him.
Well, I tell you what, Caitlin Clark has a lot better hair than Trae Young. I think that's pretty unarguable. So she's got that going for her.
I know, it does put it in perspective, right? It puts it in perspective just as when you were talking about those 30-point triple-doubles, and we showed that unbelievable graphic when you were on last week that's never been done. No back-to-back 30-point triple-doubles. No men's or women's college player had ever done it, and then the NBA players who've done it are like the who's who.
Like Charles Barkley, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird.
Who had none of them, right? Yeah. Like I mean, it's remarkable to think about the company that she was keeping on that list. So it does show you how good she is. I almost think sometimes when you have a player who's that good, she becomes, or he, or whoever it is, becomes the talking point of that team and obscures kind of the greater discussion of how good the team is. Iowa has gotten really good here. They lost to Northwestern, and then since then they've rolled off, I think it's 5 straight Big Ten wins. What's changed here with Lisa Bluder's team, aside from the fact that Caitlin Clark is on a different stratosphere.
You hit the nail on the head. Caitlin Clark's storyline almost overshadows the rest of this Iowa team, but they have so many other pieces that are key to their success. Monica Sinano, as a post player, is averaging double figures in scoring. She rebounds the ball at a high level. She leads the Big Ten in field goal percentage, and she's an automatic bucket the moment she gets deep position in the paint. And Caitlin Clark and her are like peanut butter and jelly. They just find each other. They work beautifully. Christy Winter-Scott calls them Sinano and Clark LLC, like a law firm between the two of them, because that's just how good they are, and they're hard to argue against. And then a player like a McKenna Warnock, who's a forward, shooting more than 40% from beyond the arc. She's a player that doesn't get a lot of attention, yet she's been so consistent this year. When you scout Iowa, you want to try to slow down Clark as much as possible, but there are so many other pieces on Iowa that can hurt you. And overall, good luck picking your poison.
Challenging turnaround here tonight. They played a home game on Sunday, and now you're going out to Penn State on a Tuesday, and of course that's due to COVID issues and whatnot. This is a rescheduled game, so that is challenging. But man, if you got to play games in rapid succession, you want it to be when you're playing really well.
That's exactly right. And I think what else is interesting about this Iowa team is that they dealt with so many COVID pauses throughout this season. They had one back over Thanksgiving, their own COVID pause, then other teams have dealt with COVID pauses, so Iowa has missed out on games. So therefore, they're finally starting to mesh together and get that on-court chemistry, and that's the reason why they've been able to pull off 5 in a row.
Let's dive into some other teams. Michigan is starting to get really interesting now. 5 straight wins, including the win at Maryland, which was awfully impressive because they just win. It was a dominant victory. What has stood out to you about the Wolverines here of late?
Well, what stood out, one, forward Naz Hillman, the reigning Big Ten Player of the Year. She's averaging nearly a double-double, 20 points and almost 9 rebounds. But I think what's interesting is we've come to expect that type of performance from her, so we're not necessarily as in awe of it as we have been in the past. But Naz Hillman has been so consistent this season, and she now has help that's also been consistent. Leah Brown's averaging double figures in scoring, the guard. Fellow forward Emily Kaiser is averaging double figures in scoring. In fact, Kaiser had a double-double against Ohio State back on New Year's Eve when those two played, and Michigan dominated that first matchup. Now even you have a player like Maddie Nolan, who is shooting lights out from 3, 48% from beyond the arc. She's an automatic bucket the moment she gets a clean look at the basket. So many key pieces on Michigan, not named Naz Hillman, have stepped up, and that's why they've been successful.
So you mentioned Ohio State, and that was a really impressive win, as was the Maryland win. I mean, you start looking at Michigan's resume, and it's awfully good. And now we're going to get Ohio State again against Michigan coming up on Thursday, a game I know you're going to be calling here on the Big Ten Network. Thrilled to have that game on our air. Man, Ohio State's playing well, too. I mean, that backcourt is unbelievable. They're fun to watch, right? I mean, they're up-tempo. They score a ton. Be an interesting matchup with Michigan, who can, of course, really defend. But give us a sense of what's going on here with the Buckeyes.
Ohio State leads the Big Ten, in scoring with nearly 83 points per game, ranking 3rd in the nation in that clip. So they're playing fast. So if you like offense, tune in. Ohio State's your team. Right. But what's so interesting about the way they play is they play small, because that size that they've had in the past just isn't there anymore. They have a post player in Rebecca Mikola-Shakova, who's 6'4", but she's not necessarily as physically dominant in the paint. Therefore, the guards have really stepped up, and I'm talking about Taylor Mikesell and J.C. Sheldon, who are the highest scoring backcourt duo in the Big Ten, averaging about 40 points per game. They're shooting a combined 48% from beyond the arc. I'm calling them the Splash Sisters of the Big Ten because that seems to be the only fitting nickname for them. So this backcourt has really come together for Ohio State. The guards are playing well. Braxton Miller, who's a great leader for Ohio State, is back. She did not play in that Michigan game on New Year's Eve, so I think that's going to be a massive factor headed into tomorrow's matchup.
And again, back in the top 25 this week, Ohio State is, and deservedly so. So that should be a huge game coming up on Thursday. How concerned are you about Maryland? They lost 2 of 3. I think it's fair to point out Brenda Fries was out. Her father passed away. We know how emotional that can be. And then you're just without your head coach. And there's a lot to that. But then they came back and played maybe their best game of the year against Northwestern over the weekend. So was this just kind of a blip with Maryland? Is there something bigger going on? Obviously, the expectation's sky high. This is one of those teams that you talk about, certainly at the beginning of the year, where you said this team could win a national championship.
You and I have talked about this last week, how Maryland women's basketball is kind of like Alabama football, where if they lose a game or two, you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? What is going on?
Sound the alarms.
Sound the alarms, right? Yes. Yeah, Nick Saban talking about rats or something. Brenda Fries hasn't said that just yet. That being said, this Maryland team is totally fine. They haven't had a ton of time to play on the court together fully because Diamond Miller was out for the first half of that season. She's finally back in the starting 5, and Maryland's starting 5 is averaging double figures in scoring, so they're certainly fine in that regard. Had a really good feel-good game against that Northwestern team on Sunday. So I think this Maryland team, we haven't seen how good they are yet. They have yet to peak, and the more on-court time they get together, they're one of the most dangerous teams in this conference, no matter what.
It feels like you look at that roster, and the roster's kind of too good not to be there at the end.
Well, they're all pros. I mean, Diamond Miller could literally play on half of the WNBA teams right now. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, no, that's a really talented group. Big Ten women's hoops standings. Indiana is on top. Just 6 conference games at this point. They are on a COVID pause, as we have documented. Michigan, Iowa, just 1 loss each. Maryland, 3 games back now in the loss column. I want to do some mid-season awards. Let's start here with the Coach of the Year. Megan, where would you go at this point?
For me, Indiana head coach Terry Morin is the Coach of the Year for a multitude of reasons. First off, IU has stayed within the top 10 for a majority of this season. They've been one of the most consistent and disciplined teams, not just in the Big Ten, but also in the country. But what's been most impressive is leading scorer and starting forward Mackenzie Holmes has been out the last couple of games. Still no word on how long she's going to be out. She's dealing with a knee injury. That being said, this Indiana team has been able to pick up right where Holmes left off, and it hasn't had that massive of an effect on the defensive side of the ball because this team is so defensively disciplined, and they have so many veterans that can step up and play, like a Grace Berger, who led the nation in triple doubles a season ago, a player like an Allie Patberg, who was playing 7 years of college basketball, and a player like Alexa Golbe, who, we always love that fact, for 7 years. 3 different U.S. presidential terms.
Who want to be in college for 7 years?
Ooh, I'm sure there's a lot of envious people out there. I can tell you that. But this Indiana team has remained so disciplined despite missing some key pieces, and I think Terry Morin's done an excellent job throughout this season.
We had her on the show last week, and it does sound like Mackenzie Holmes had surgery, as you know, on her knee. It sounds like it's going to be a little bit longer, later rather than sooner in terms of when she comes back. Maybe be the way to phrase it. So, fair to say Terry Morin's toughest work is ahead of her now, because the one thing we've talked about all along is they don't have great depth, right? And so this becomes a really difficult stretch because Mackenzie Holmes is a great player.
A great player. I mean, she has most of her starters playing almost 30 minutes a game. So that has been Indiana's knock from the beginning of the season. They do have so many different 5 players really that they only play. Sometimes they go 6 deep. So now Morin's having to go to her bench, but the drop-off has not been too significant just yet. Curious how that's going to be as they get into some of the tougher gauntlets of the Big Ten teams that are ranking in the top 4. But I was really impressed with Indiana when they went on the road to Purdue, a tough environment at Mackey. It was one of the best women's basketball environments I've ever been around, especially as of late. And Purdue led that game with like 4 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. IU came back, forced overtime, and ultimately won. So this is a really tough, battle-tested Indiana squad that I still think could win without Mackenzie Holmes right now.
So Terry Morin, Coach of the Year at this point. Player of the Year, I mean, we just talked about Clark as national
Should we just give her the award? Should we just dust it off for her?
Is there anyone else even in the discussion? Like, is Naz Hillman in the discussion? Sure. Who else would you even suggest? Maybe one of the guards at Ohio State?
Sure. I mean, look, there are so many great scorers in the Big Ten. I mean, first off, the Big Ten Player of the Year, in my opinion, is a scoring award, always. So Caitlin Clark's checking that box. She leads the nation in scoring with nearly 26 points per game. But the way she's doing it regarding the triple doubles, I think is what is her strongest case to win this award. She's doing it night in and night out consistently. Iowa's winning games now. I think that Caitlin Clark right now is the favorite for National Player of the Year. The only player maybe in contention with her right now would be Aaliyah Boston, the forward from South Carolina, who's averaging a double-double. But the way Caitlin Clark plays, it's so good for women's basketball because she's so exciting and plays with so much passion. You can't keep your eyes off her when she's on the floor. Crafty off of the dribble. She makes plays in transition. She reminds me almost of a quarterback on the football field, where she's just so crafty and shifty and can get through defenses and find open players down the field. One of the best visionaries in the game.
Now, she is amazing to watch. I mean, it really is. Like, again, you have a chance to see her tonight here on the Big Ten Network. If you haven't seen her, watch her. I mean, she's just unbelievable.
She's just so fun to watch. She's such a unique player in that sense. I really haven't seen very many like her in my recent memory. She hits logo threes, which are always fun, and she's just, again, that passion piece is what makes her so special.
Defensive Player of the Year, where would you go there?
Northwestern guard Veronica Burton. She's the 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. It's so difficult in this conference, who has some of the best scorers in the country, to be really good defensively, and Veronica Burton is excellent in that blizzard defense that Northwestern runs. She reads passing lanes so well, understands personnel, and watches so much film. Her anticipation is truly unmatched. There are so many WNBA coaches that reach out to her head coach and ask, when is she coming? When is she ready for the league? They think that she is ready to come onto a team and run a team right now because she is so poised and she puts so much effort forth on that defensive side of the ball. In my mind, there's no way you cannot give her that award. She's averaging 4 steals per game. That's #1 in the Big Ten, #3 in the nation.
Yeah, and most among any power conference players in the nation. And not only is it #1 in the Big Ten, it's almost double what anyone else is averaging, right?
It's insane.
No, staggeringly high. And her value is not just on the defensive side. Again, it's another one of those players where if you haven't seen her play, I mean, the way she conducts that team is incredibly impressive.
And she's so under the radar regarding how good she is because she doesn't play flashy at all. It's so blue collar, put the hard hat on and go to work. And Veronica Burton is one of the smartest players, not only in the Big Ten, but also in college basketball as a whole.
A really good player. And it'll be interesting to see whether Northwestern can make a push. They're going to be one of those teams that's going to be on the bubble here as to whether or not they can get into the tournament. Where would you go with freshman of the year in the Big Ten?
Nebraska forward Alexis Markowski, who is another just blast to watch on the floor. And she's emerged kind of as of late. She had a breakout game earlier this year against Michigan. And get this, she's shooting more than 70% from 3. She doesn't normally shoot 3s. She knocked down 6 against Iowa the other day, and she has just been a force to be reckoned with in the paint. She did a great job coming into the starting lineup because Nebraska forward Bella Cravens was injured and just came in and understood the assignment, to be quite frank. Amy Williams has been able to trust her more and more with the ball, getting her really deep in the paint and positions to score. And that Nebraska team is loaded with really good guards that can find post players. So Alexis Markowski is in excellent hands, and I just don't see anyone that can compete with her for this Player of the Year, Freshman of the Year.
6'3" and hit 6 of 7 from 3.
Can you believe that? I mean, we're just talking like it's horse. She's just out there knocking him down like it's nothing. And she doesn't even shoot that many 3s to begin with.
Right.
Yeah, she went 6 for 7. Hey, if you've got the hot hand, keep shooting. You got the green light. No coach, after a player has knocked down 3 in a row, is going to say, stop shooting. Go as many as you can.
It's a nice problem to have, but I mean, it does bring up this notion of what happens when Bella Cravens is ready to come back and play.
Yeah.
Right? And you do wonder a bit about, how do you handle that internally? I think these become kind of delicate issues, but man, you look at a player who's playing that well, and from a team point of view, it's tough to take her out of the lineup.
It's so tough, and especially because so many teams in the Big Ten have size, and Markowski has size. The one area where she needs to improve is defensively, moving her feet and that quickness aspect, but that's just going to come over time for her.
All right, great stuff, Megan. Looking forward to that game Thursday. It's going to be huge again.
It's going to be awesome.
Ohio State and Michigan, and we will anticipate your call there. Megan McEwen, thanks so much for joining us, shedding some light on women's hoops. Got one